literally within 48 hours of getting this job here at William Paterson, I thought about wanting to do this. Teaching and good teaching is really something that's very deep, deep interest to me. And I know how critically important it is, especially for campuses like ours. I mean, this is where we truly transform lives. So I just was looking forward to engaging some folks in a conversation. And I debated which direction I'm going to go with some sort of supplemental reading material. And Bob and Keumjae were my first choice was a book about 400 pages long, and they were so gracious to their new provost. Maybe we might do something different. So then I went the whole other direction and said, well, it won't matter what you read anything, at least it brings something that can inform our conversation. So this would be somewhat didactic. I'm not going to lecture to you. That's not exactly good teaching, just tell you things. Because I know that there's talents and insights that you all have, but maybe I can release those a little bit and we'll all learn a little bit from each other. So I guess the way I want to start is, I want you all to take one of these, and if there's not enough, just take one in half, because you're only going to need probably one or two at most anyways. But you will need a pen, so, you will need to write neatly. In fact, I forgot to get my own here. Okay, so just tear them in half if there's not enough. So Bob, give me a few of yours. So. All right, so this is what we sort of have here to use that. Okay. That's good. So, does everybody have, everybody's got one, everybody's got a pen, all right? Now I want you to do something special for me. I want you to close your eyes. Okay? I know this is a little weird, but I want you to reflect back on your experience in a classroom. Okay, it may have been at the graduate level. It might have been at the undergraduate level. It might have even been at the high school level. But I want you to think about the very best teacher you ever had, or at least the teacher that comes to mind first, that probably is one that you just thought so positively about. I want you to visualize that person in your mind. Think about who they were and what the context was, and then I want you on one or maybe two of these sticky notes to write down one thing that you thought contributed to making that person the absolute best instructor you ever had. Okay? So, there you go. And you need to write it large enough. I know, I blew that bad teaching thing, but I'll take ownership for it. What we're going to be doing is, you're going to take your sticky note and you're going to attach it to your clothes in some way. We're going to get up and we're going to quietly walk around the room and read what people have on their sticky note. All right? And then once we've gone around and read what we saw, you're going to pair up with somebody that somehow what they wrote intrigued you. Okay? Now, it may be a practical reality that you'll be next to somebody and everybody else is paired up and then that person intrigues you. Okay, however that works. But I want you to have read everybody's, and I want you to ideally find somebody that was intriguing to you. Then I want you to take a few moments and talk about why you wrote that down on your pad of paper. And maybe, think a little bit about sort of engage each other in a little conversation. Maybe it'll be about 5 minutes and we'll do that part, about why it was that you picked this thing. Okay? But it was important that you notice what other people had, because I am going to ask you about some of the themes that are reflected in our sticky notes. Okay? Everybody got our task? Okay. All right, so we'll just get up and we'll just sort of walk silently around and read what we see. So don't talk yet. Just take a look at what you read. We'll stay on here.
Okay.
One or two, yeah.
So, rocks. Teaching. Okay, and yours?
Or we should have put the little responsibility.
I cannot see yours. Really?
Oh, okay.
Students before this morning. I'll put it down. And share.
Oops, good. Yes.
Sorry.
Oh.
Can't be done, sorry. I'm so cute.
Don't fit. Okay.
Passion, knowledge, expectations, never blessed to say
What is this other one here? Encouragement.
thank you.
Love. Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably better.
Should have said it has to be legible.
I know.
You too? Okay, yeah, it's starting to see.
That was your favorite, that's great.
Okay. Is there a chance for a tracking shot?
Okay, so you go ahead and find your partner, find a partner, and then sit down wherever you happen to see a chair that's available. We'll be away. There's no safety here at the moment. Would you be my partner? Yes, I do.
It's English related.
Oh, okay. And make sure, if it turns out we have an odd number, you could be a threesome, but let's try to get a pair. Wherever you are. And then just go ahead and find a seat wherever you want.
Do you have partners or you don't? Okay.
Find out some more about your partner and why they picked
I think it was a
Okay, colleagues, I'm happy you get back in your spots again. You can now go back and take whatever chair was your home before. Great.
By the way, I'm having lunch Monday with Jim Howard. Yeah, please do. Please do. I think it's
Okay, so maybe a few folks can share, what intrigued you, or what kind of got you interested about your other person in your group that sort of connected, or something they shared about why they picked their person, sort of jumped out to you.
So Gigi and I went through very strict, more traditional kind of. We both did undergrad in another country, and we didn't have a room for mistakes and failure. It was a pretty common experience for both of us. But she had a teacher who did not penalize failure, and I shared my experience of in grad school where saying stupid thing was not a shameful thing, which was kind of very freeing experience. So we thought that letting students fail or making them fail may not be, but making mistakes was as a stepping stone for success actually was an important message. This is the way Gigi said it, and I thought it was very inspiring.
That caught my attention when I saw her also note, and interestingly, last night I had a speaker in my class. It's a alum from our school who became very successful as a women entrepreneur. And then I asked her to share a leadership lesson with students, and then she mentioned that she tries to communicate with her team members instead of using this notion of a mistake or an error, framing it as continuous improvement. So that immediately caught my attention, and I thought that was very interesting.
Okay. Other thoughts?
We went off a little bit actually, but what the three of us have been talking a lot about is how different students are today from how we were. I mean, and technology is what we were really talking about. So not only do they use it, in education, but how they're pretty much using it nonstop during class. So, how do you kind of factor that in, and how do you make the best of technology?
Do you have any answers for all of us?
Oh.
Shut that thing down, or let's bring that into the learning moment, do a poll kind of stuff or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
We both phrased it differently, but I think we both were talking about expectations, positive and negative expectations. I was taking it from a positive expectations by the teacher, but you framed it as both the impact of positive, negating the impact of negative. So, how much the expectations matter. And yeah.
You used positive and negative expectations. What as you were talking, what came to mind was the signaling of high
Yes.
versus low expectations.
Or not, for you it was not being believed in, right? I mean, and being
Right.
believed in, so which I consider kind of a subset of the expectations
Okay.
in a way.
So believed in the instructor, the legitimacy of the instructor?
The ability. So what we were discussing, and I had shared, and mine goes back to high school because
Okay.
I wouldn't be here today if it wasn't for two teachers who actually kind of pulled me out of the funk. So I had one junior, when I was a junior, I was out with the flu. He told my whole class that I had problems and I really needed help in writing because I was not, I guess in a way, he was saying that I wasn't literate. And so and my classmates told me about it. So my grades just plummeted and I was excelling. I was an A student in math and science. And my math teacher came to my rescue basically and told me you'll have detention for the rest of your life until you get your grades back up because I know you do it. And then my art teacher was waiting for me to get back on stage to help out, but couldn't because I always had detention. So she had a long talk with me saying that, you can't really just rely on just what one person has to say. You have to really believe in yourself and the people who believe in you. So those two people really pulled me out because I'm teaching college. Wish that guy was alive though. Because now I'm old enough to say something about it. I don't think so. He was old when I was young.
The subject of expectations is so critical in any setting.
Yeah.
It's particularly critical in our setting when we have so many students who probably at some level have received all kinds of messages. In fact, the anecdote that I like to use a lot is that 3-letter acronym, GPA, that somehow labels a person one of those. And how just devastating that can be. But how so many examples of people have transcended that to be something that isn't what that stereotype is.
I want to share something related to the first point, and this is very cultural difference that I noticed since I came here. So my education was mostly in Israel, undergraduate and MBA, and I came here to do my PhD. And in Israel, when I was teaching, I could always, when I asked a question, everybody was trying to answer, no matter if they knew the answer or didn't know the answer. And I just needed to stop them to, like I had to kind of, and I come here, and I was at Penn State, and undergraduate, nobody talks. Nobody wants to raise their hand. Nobody wants to do anything. I'm saying, for God's sake, why? I couldn't figure out that you don't want to look stupid, you don't want to look not knowledgeable. That's something that's very different in our culture. Like the cultural difference was shocking for me. Then I couldn't understand, okay, I need to somehow to make them talk because I don't want to talk the whole time. So that was the biggest challenge of my teaching in the United States.
The library professor who mentored me when I was doing my master's degree always used to say the stupid question is the question that's not asked. Which I kept that, and I used to tell that to my students all the time. Just ask it, whatever you have.
I'm curious, were any of us the one who would ask the stupid question? That takes a lot of chutzpah to do that. We all have advanced degrees and stuff, and
But the
success
thing
by that
is, you
measure.
don't know if it's a stupid question.
Well, you think they all are, probably.
If somebody says, somebody tells you later, that will be.
Maybe we've seen it happen to somebody, or we felt like it happened to us. Yes, Bob.
So Scott and I were sort of connected. We both talked about
Glenn.
we were so connected. Anyway, Harry had a great teacher. made students feel like they could be talented writers, and I had a teacher who just really felt like what I had to say mattered. I don't know if he was great at faking it or he really felt it, but it really worked. It just, there was just a connection. He wasn't just doing a job. He made it feel like, our ideas and our questions mattered to him, each one of us.
That's so important.
Scott,
It really is.
Sorry.
Okay.
It's late in the
What did you notice in so these are great, and some level these are the themes, obviously, that have popped out, but what any other themes that sort of you saw on the notes, or maybe something you saw that was thought was missing from the list that wasn't reflected, or maybe wasn't as prevalent as you thought it might be?
So it seemed like a lot of people had like enthusiasm, passion for what they were doing. That theme, a few people had that. So and that came across, to us as students.
Somebody had something that sort of another sort of sense of that, and that was what was the word that they used? Entertaining? Did someone use that word, or somehow something that was a synonym of entertaining? Or somehow that they were engaging in that way, that they could command a classroom with great theater. I mean, or something like that. I thought someone had something on that note, but enthusiasm. Yeah, I saw that in there. How many people had the word knowledge or expertise in some way? Talk about why you picked that word. Look at whose hands are up for a moment here. Think of who. Okay, so who picked that? Why did you pick that as one of the reasons that led you to? How many of you had knowledge as the only thing you had in it, or as you think about what you wrote, was the predominant thing that came to mind for you? Okay, Keumjae, can you speak about that?
I think the two teachers that inspired me were all content driven.
Okay.
One teacher told me about this German historical history in the way that I never read framed. He had a very critical frame, so that was important. He would be a terrible teacher here because he doesn't waste a second. The moment he comes in, he starts spewing words until the end, and we would have like half the note filled because we would write down everything. That happens to the class that I went to. The other teacher was a teacher who gave exam for which no answer is in the book. So we would have to, so she gives us the exam question ahead of time, and we have to work on it. And it's very difficult because we have to analyze the reading to be able to come up with this next level answer. So these are those content that happens to be. And I also did my undergrad in another country, so that might
I'm thinking about that too.
because no teacher was entertaining in my
the really was more, I don't think it was looked as positive as today with our students, in our generation of teachers. They were supposed to be serious.
I wonder how it is now in the countries that you're from, in the age of Facebook and the phone.
I don't think it has changed.
Well, yes.
But that's a really interesting point, because now it seems like the expert is sort of debunked. Like we may have all been wowed by somebody who had all this. Now it's like, I know just as much as you do, or there's kind of that feeling to it, like it's equalized more. So I'm not sure that being the knowledgeable one is respected.
I remember I had a student in one of my classes. He would really make me feel uncomfortable because he would challenge every word I say, and he said, "Yeah, but I looked it up, and that's not exactly." Or I looked at, and that was really. And he was not American; he was European, and I was kind of okay. But that was kind of a situation that he was sitting there. You stand in front of the class and you may prepare yourself, but you are, and he's sitting there and kind of trying to
debunking what you said.
Yeah, that was very challenging.
Yes, sir.
Actually, I have one. I heard a lot of great ones up here, but a teacher that comes to mind that made an impact and I thought was a great teacher that influenced my degree. She was a history teacher, and she used to consider us her children. She didn't have children. She actually sacrificed having kids with her husband in order to, she really master of content, and you could tell that. And she had a passion for what she taught. So much so that, like I said, she sacrificed having children so she could tour the world and see the things that she taught and bring it back. Her room was filled with dioramas that she had the students make as projects. Like she had Hatshepsut's Valley of the Kings, her tomb designed out there. I mean, the room was amazing. And she was a disciplinarian as well. So I mean, as much passion she would throw, if you like didn't do your homework or something, she would dump your desk, But she had charisma. She had the passion and the mastery of knowledge, and she could convey it. And
boy, that's a sort of extraordinary story. Wow, we're all humbled by that. Oh, our student has a perspective here. Go for it.
I would say my communications professor from my community college. At first, when I chose communications, I was kind of scared because, I'll be honest, my people skills aren't that great. I'm still very shy and I have to work on them, but he made me feel so comfortable. He made me feel like there were no dumb questions. And he really helped me out with personal things, school things. He helped me know what classes I needed to take and what questions to ask at internship fairs or for interviews. And we have a great relationship today. I mean, he even offered me an internship at the community college. So he says, anything you need, just let me know.
Let me, on the count of 3, I want you to say out loud the name of this person. Okay? All right, now if you can't remember, don't say it. But in a moment I'm asked, raise your hand if you remember the name of your person. I mean, look at it. There's nothing at all flaw about it.
Remember his face, his stature.
What is it? Okay.
Remember, he died recently and I read his obituary. So.
But isn't it amazing we all remember that person's name even? So let's just honor that person in a count of 3. Just say out loud the person's name. 1, 2, 3.
Mrs. All Miller.
Wow, okay. So now we've just honored the craft of teaching. Before we get a little more deeply into the 7 principles, I wanted to just share with you my former institution, Indiana State University, our director of the Faculty Center for Teaching Excellence, during what we call the library extravaganza, because the facility was located in the library, asked students to come by and put sticky notes on their wall. Actually, they did wipe on, wipe off wall. Of what in their mind was the greatest attribute, the attribute of a great teacher. Okay, and so they would write these things, and they turned that in. So there were hundreds of words on that wall. Keep in mind, our institution is very similar to William Paterson, and they turned it into a wordle. Okay, so the bigger words were ones that were used more commonly. And I thought I would share with you and then pass it around so you can see it. They turned it into a tree because we were the sycamores. That was our mascot. We're the fighting trees. Woohoo! But in any event, but if you look at these words, passion, cares, help, understanding, patience, love, those are the big ones that came out. You have to look a little harder to find smart, expert, the kinds of things that you normally associated with that. And I think we could have a long conversation about sort of American culture around these things. But I do think, they're the gateway, at least, to engagement of students comes through these sorts of things. Okay, so with that as a backdrop, has anyone ever heard of the 7 principles for good practice in undergraduate education? So raise your hand if you've heard of it before. Okay. So if you're in student affairs, you probably have, because you know where Chickering is. And you all work in teaching and learning, but a few other folks knew. So this came out in the 80s, okay? And it was very seminal in the sense that they did a huge big sort of study of all the research and put it all together and sought to capture what the themes that came out in the scholarship. And they argued there were these 7 things that mattered. And those 7 things could be placed in these areas: encouraging contact between students and faculty, developing reciprocity and cooperation among students, encouraging active learning, giving prompt feedback, emphasizing time on task, communicating high expectations, and respects diverse talents and ways of learning. So those were a thing. Just for today, we're going to focus on just the first 3. And if you're excited about this enough, you can come and get the next 4 back on the main campus. So that's where we're going to go. What I think I'd like to do, or I know I'd like to do this, I'd like us to get into 3 groups. And I'd like you as your group to each take one of these. This is a front back. And I want you, and what I've put on there are some anchoring points of examples that are typically associated with this particular category. So good practices encourage student-faculty contact. Some examples or ways in which that is demonstrated. And then for the other 2 on there. And as in your small group, I'd like you to reflect on those, have a little conversation. Is there something that resonates for you in one of those sort of on the list? What do you do in your class that's reflected in one of those items, okay, that has perhaps you think served you well? What are some of the challenges that you find about being able to do one of these things or one of these things well, okay? And then how we can strengthen the culture for improvement here at William Paterson in the teaching learning enterprise in this particular area. Okay, does that make sense? I'll write those on the board. There's basically 3 questions I'd like you to engage, and then we'll have a report at it again after.
Are we focusing on one, or we?
I'm going to have you each focus on one.
Okay.
And I'll probably give you 10-ish minutes, maybe a little bit longer depending on how it's going. And if you decide you've exhausted the conversation, you may go on to some others. But you're going to be the expert in this particular topic. You're assigned one, but you'll still be able to engage with the others around some other groups. So I think what we'll do for simplicity is maybe let's have the 4 of you be the good practices encourage student-faculty contact. And then the 4 of you will be good practices encourages cooperation among students. And then our anchoring group over here are 4, good practices encourages active learning. Okay, so 3 questions which we'll write up on the board. What do you do, and if you want, maybe you could throw yourself in the corner of that room so it's easier to talk with each other and all that, because you might like it. What do you do in your class in one of these areas that really seems to work for you, and why? So hopefully you can dissect it better as a group. What are the challenges of one or more of these, doing this in the classroom, and how can we strengthen the culture for improvement here at William Paterson among faculty in your particular area? Okay? So I'll have written down them all by the time we get to the second one.
Shakespeare.
So these are skills
that was everything I was trying to say. It could be any class.
Get into that because they want to learn what someone else knows, and then they have to point it out. We were talking the other day about cancer to help class. Cancer, so I was kind of opened it up with. We all know someone. Does anybody want to share a story of something? Okay, let's come back together. We want to honor our time. There was one mother who before she started high school, her dad was in remission. This is a freshman. I thought, oh my gosh, Okay. Yeah. So some really good conversation I heard going around this table, and a great mix of great stories of great success, and then those stories of the conundrums that we can confront. So So maybe each group can just hit some highlight. These are some of the salient things we talked about, and they may or may not be in all three of those areas, but let's see if we can cover them in some way. So which group wants to go first? What is important for us to know about your conversation?
Well, ours was about active learning. So we actually had a lot of examples of methods that we usually use in the College of Business that might be very much also used in other colleges, such as the role playing and the application of a practical case that the student is analyzing, presentations. And then we also were mentioning about what is the value of the teacher nowadays compared to what used to be before, as we were talking about being an expert and now knowledge being more accessible. So we were mentioning about three aspects. One is the encouraging higher level thinking, with more critical thinking, application of a certain material to the context of the personal lives of students or career choices, and then also having that positive expectation that you mentioned before and helping students believe in themselves, and also allowing that space for practice and learning, reaching milestones towards a higher goal, and then finally how to encourage faculty to develop competencies in active learning or to have a broader repertoire of methods. We thought about that those types of teaching roundtables and conversations, such as what we're doing right now, is very helpful. Also, in our disciplines, we have conferences that address teaching that have been quite helpful. And another idea is how to encourage faculty to take risks and try innovative ideas, innovative projects that might be something unusual or not tried before, with type of incentives and also a safe space for faculty to try new ways of teaching certain material.
A lot of territory in there.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. How about from this group? What would you say is important for us to know about your conversation?
We found that group work is really important. You know, we understand the importance to teach the social behaviors that are necessary in the real world. But we also know we teach all graduates. They just don't like it. That's the challenge. They want to do their own work. One is worried about their GPA, or is worried about getting in. So as teachers, we worry how do we, in some of those situations, maybe no grading, or they grade one another. We talked a lot of different possibilities of how we can do that.
Talk about bonding over misery. That seems
well, that was a great phrase.
Keumjae's phrase. Yes, that she had a class that had been together in such a hard class that they were bonded and were communicating well when they came into her class because they had bonded over the previous misery, and how that was really a good thing in a way. So it supported them. Yeah.
And you have the additional issue of online courses.
Yes.
Right, so it makes it even harder. We talked about Zoom and the benefits of that kind of technology, but in reality, it's not exactly this. It's not the same.
Yeah, it can be much harder, and it takes a lot of faculty work to create. Like Keumjae was talking about how she has to purposefully create her groups and watch it over the semester, very carefully put together those personalities that will work. It takes, when I did a group work with an undergrad class I taught, I made sure that at the end they evaluated themselves, they evaluated each other, so you kind of gave them, relieved that anxiety. I think the big anxiety is, I don't want to depend on somebody else for my grade. That's I think the biggest anxiety, which I feel that. I also understand that when you work, you're depending on everybody else for the outcome, and the grade is, is your company going to succeed? And you depend on everybody in the company for that. So but it's very hard when you're to translate that into class.
How about for this group? What are a few important themes you think would be valuable for us to know?
pick a spokesperson.
Yeah.
I took a few notes. So we spent a lot of time in the beginning talking about the importance of learning students' names, and the big difference that makes for students. The difference between, for instance, going through a whole semester where the faculty member doesn't take the time or show the interest in learning their names, and what a different experience that would be from somebody who really takes the trouble to get to know their names. And told the story about being in a coffee shop with her husband recently, and the student who happened to be serving was one of her students, and the fact that she remembered her name, she nearly dropped the coffee in your lap. She was so touched that you knew who she was. So
She said, "How is your mom doing?" Throwing her off the deep end.
So we spent a lot of time talking about that. Bob was giving an example of that. If they're not in class, he takes the trouble to write to each student what we covered in class, what's the homework for next time, and just really expressing that they were missed, and that seems to have the impact of them coming back the next time.
Wow.
I sometimes worry if it makes it too easy to skip class, I think it's basically a positive. We just have one request I do for number 3.
Yeah.
Which is there a way on the rosters that we get at the beginning that there could be a link to the student ID photo?
That was one of the things I've noticed about this campus that you don't have that we had. So I'm sure technically yes, there's got to be
because
a
they all
way.
have an ID.
I will jot that down.
I have them because I do everything online. One of the first week, they have to go into their profile in Blackboard and add a picture. But if you're not using the discussion board, but it's one way to get around. It doesn't show up in the roster, but if you do have any discussions online, because I was getting weary-eyed looking at that little stupid outline, and it's like I can't tell one out who the hell is talking. So sometimes it's a picture of their dog. But I know this dog lady's talking, and it's this one, and it gives me association. So
I have them introduce themselves using Flipgrid.
Oh, yeah.
So it's a short video.
What is it?
Flipgrid. So they talk, they introduce themselves in a video, and then they respond to each other.
it's a
So it's
free.
yeah, it's a free.
And your distance education teaching in context?
Yeah.
Okay.
But you could use it in a classroom.
You could.
Have them do it. They can do it on their phone. Everybody's got a phone. You set it
There's
up
an
in
app for it.
and then they get to express something about
I wrote that down, didn't I?
I had some experiences with remembering the names. Believe it or not, for every single class I've taught for the Paterson, and for the first session of each semester, I have at least 2 students who can remember everybody's name in the class. The reason being, I always play a game, the icebreaker. It's called Remember the Name. I brought the ball, and people were holding the ball. Introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then throw balls to each other to repeat each other's names. So I give extra credit for people who can remember everybody's name, and
Including yourself, it helps you
Yeah. So
play one more round.
we did exercise on the first day of the class, and I have at least 2 or 3 students, no matter what's the class size. Sometimes it's 20, sometimes it's 40. There are always people who can do that. With a little bit of motivation, they can do that. And I also have this personal information sheet that I left to block. Tell me about anything you want to share. So I not only know their names, I also know their name of their pet. I know how many guinea pigs my students have. I know what kind of work they're doing. And I'll ask them to share with photos. The main reason is I want natural faces and names. So I was able to remember everybody's name for the first 2 weeks.
Wow.
That's how I did it.
I have a question as a follow-up. Do you have difficulty getting students to come to your office hours?
If they have questions, I always tell them the best way to reach me is through email.
Okay.
Because now I'm teaching on main campus, but my office has Valley.
So built-in channel.
If you want to see me, I can stay after class. It's just they don't have to wait until my office hours to come to see me, unless it's very private conversation. But anytime they have questions, I can send an email.
what I was attempting to signal there is the fact that you create that incredible environment in that first class, or what sounds like an incredible environment, makes you accessible to them.
Yes.
Which way I need them to not be as fearful about coming to your
So
office
I just
hours.
found
There's
out-
some other factors in your mix that make it.
I like festival. It's positive when they know this is the moment you show you care. So they're being valued. They're looking into being valued.
Yes, our student gets to maybe be the last word on this.
I was going to input on the office hours. That's how I created my relationship with my communications professor.
Okay.
I practically stalked him, actually. Whenever he had office hours, I would be waiting outside.
Okay.
Sometimes I know he would probably maybe get irritated, but we built a good relationship. So even if it was just to like talk, like, hey, how are you? You know, stuff like that.
You can use the Blackboard Collaborate for office hours if you don't want them to travel, you know. So for example, for my project, I wanted to make sure everybody understood what we are going to do. So I set up like 15 minutes for Blackboard Collaboration meetings, and it was very, very, very good. So they could ask questions privately. And it's already set up in your Blackboard course, so you don't need to basically do much to do it. So very convenient.
Well, I know you know this intellectually, but students want to be able to make a connection with you, and particularly with traditional age undergraduates, there's a huge power differential between the two of you, and they feel it acutely, and you sort of notice it in a sense, and you know it, and maybe at some level you like to take advantage of it in that arena. But if they have any self-doubt being in this room, it's especially important to them that they have some belief that you're a real human being. And by the way, you've made mistakes too. So I'm just curious, how many of you were the first in your families to go to college? Okay, so about a quarter of the group.
Still the only one.
Still
But
the
my
only
kids
one.
went.
Okay, so sometimes that kind of messaging, or messaging about a moment in your life when you were in a class like this that you struggled, by the way, and look, you survived. Just by standing in front of you survived, and these are some of the things that you did to do that. So when you take that time, particularly early on, before you get into the meat of the course, that can be just a really important connection thing. And I'm just going to close with something else that prompted when I went around here is someone mentioned Starfish a time or two, and Starfish is certainly not a panacea tool, but it becomes a technological tool to be able to make a wraparound community that when it works optimally can be helpful. But one of the things, has anybody ever used the kudos feature in you have? Okay. But when I say the kudos feature, do you know genuinely what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
So I've actually seen some firsthand evidence of how that makes a difference. And I, last month in my newsletter, and probably again this month, I put in some examples in there. Because we generally evaluate papers and projects with, here's what you did wrong, or here's how you can strengthen that. We sort of leave out here's what you did really well. But we assume that they already know what that is, and the fact you didn't mark it up must be the signal to them that they did well. Well, it really isn't necessarily. So when you do something out of the norm, like, hey, you did really awesome on that particular thing, that stuff makes a huge difference. And I've seen some examples of that in the Starfish system.
Starfish is not geared toward graduates.
I know, it is. It really isn't a graduate. I'm really talking the undergraduate.
Yeah, but just,
I
don't know if it's planning to be geared toward graduates or not.
It isn't at the current moment. It's really been about undergraduate. Okay. Let me just close with, I don't know if any of you read books about good teaching, and there's so many, and I know they do great book reads through this. This happens to be one of my favorite. It's called, by a gentleman named Ken Bain, who for many decades led a Center for Teaching Learning, Russ Labatt. It's called What the Best College Teachers Do. And it's just packed with some really good insights. But just a couple quotes I'll leave you with. Simply put, the best teachers believe that learning involves both personal and intellectual development, and neither the ability to think nor the qualities of being a mature human are immutable. People can change, and those changes, not just the accumulation of information, represents true learning. And then the other one I just got here. The best teaching is often both an intellectual creation and a performing art. So it's both science and art, you know, and if it was easy, we'd all be doing it. But for me, it's a journey. We're never at nirvana, and experts, regardless of how long you're doing it, but if you have a conversation about it and you learn from each other, good things can happen. So I hope that, you know, thank you to the CTE for sponsoring this stuff that you do. Now let's do our raffle.